we'd have it all seamless.
Here we go.
Nevertheless, it just goes to show that, agility is never ending. Let me see. Okay. Okay. Let me just check. Do we have people? Yes, we do have people in the waiting room. Come on in. Come on in, folks. Alrighty. A very, very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. It's a real treat to be spending this time with you. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Dr. Jen Frahm. I'm here with co-founder Lena Ross. And this is a presentation we've been really, really keen to share with you. Before we do, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm joining you, which is the Woiwurrung Wurundjeri land. Lena is joining from the Boon Wurrung, and we'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present of the lands on which you are joining us from as well. I'm super conscious that in preparing for this webinar, recognising that the First Nations people of Australia have got some 60,000 years experience in navigating shifts with a space of wisdom, with respect, with resilience. And it's my hope that that's one of the things that we take out of this webinar, that we can embody some of those qualities going forward as leaders of continuous and unrelenting change. So, for those of you who haven't joined us in a webinar before, typically we like to say you do whatever you need to do to be comfortable with taking in new knowledge. So if you want to have your cameras off, that's totally fine. If you want to be taking notes throughout it, at the end of this webinar, we will send you an email with some points of recap. We're also going to be putting the recordings up on YouTube. We've got a YouTube channel. So if at any point, there's a fair bit in it, it feels a little bit too much, you're going to be able to go back and catch up with it. It's not a problem. So the Agile Change Leadership Institute, we've been going since 2019 is when we started. And we have much joy in saying, we used to say we're in 81 countries. Well, based on the enrollee of the other day in one of a very little country in Africa, we're now at 82 countries, which is pretty bloody exciting, I have to say. We help 161 organisations. We've had some 3,215 plus students through our doors. And we like to pride ourselves on creating education that is modern, it's adaptive, it's accessible, and most of all, it's practical. So we're really hoping there's going to be a few things that you can take out of this webinar. And indeed, that's going to be in the email that follows up from this. Some of you will know our books. From our books, we do enjoy writing a few books, and we are on the cusp of releasing a sixth book. Is it five? One, two, three, four, four. Sixth book into the ether with my new book, Change Communication. That will be coming out July 24th. Let's get underway. Let's get underway. Enough of the preamble. Okay. Here's the three things that I want to cover in the next 45 minutes. So first is let's get grounded in change is changing. And what that means is change leadership is changing. What has worked for decades? Arguably, some of it hasn't worked, but we've been a bit slow to catch up. But what has worked for decades is not working anymore. And we're going to look a little bit at why that might be and what we can do about it. We'll introduce you to 6 big shifts that we see are really the center of what enables leaders today and enables you to be leading change. And then we'll pose an option for you to look at what do you want to work on? Because, we don't want to boil the ocean. This is about finding one particular shift that is most important to you and that you can work with to actually make a dent in your change leadership. So, Lena, change leadership is changing. Talk to us.
It certainly is. And good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. I'm Lena Ross, the other half of Agile Change, Agile Leadership Institute. So, yes, indeed, it is changing. And this is why we have the whole theme underpinning this for the presentation this morning or today. So let's have a look, Jen, about how what's worked before isn't going to hold up now because we've prepared a really neat slide that explains that on what we used to do. And like Jen said, decades that have worked really well, all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but have been incrementally disrupted and will continue to be disrupted. So once upon a time, it was a stable business environment. We know change had a clear beginning, middle, and end, and the Kurt Lewin model of unfreeze, change, and then refreeze really applied. And we knew that we had a couple of, we always had some time, a few weeks, a few months, even years, so we could rest and reset, and then the next change would come. So there'd be one or two changes, really big changes, maybe every 3 years. And we had a workforce that really valued their job security. So compliance was easier to have on board. Things were predictable, there's a lot more certainty. And if you were a strong, charismatic leader, you were going to do quite well in this environment. You could hold this together. But things have changed, as we know, and Jen mentioned relentless and continuous change. So this is what leading change used to mean. But now what it calls on is different approaches in leadership. There's so much uncertainty. And we've got 5 generations in the workplace, each bringing their own different set of expectations and nuances as well. Jen uses the word fire hose of change concurrently, which I really love. So we know that change is ongoing. We know that time of change having a clear end and then having a little bit of a reset time doesn't work anymore. And we call this the fire hose. And then with the fire hose of continuous change, now we have a tsunami of AI, which is the talk of the town, and everyone wondering, what do we do now with the advent of AI, which isn't going away? So there's always going to be something. So Jen and I have been tossing around this question. So what is it about AI? Do we actually need a new discipline? Do we need what else do we need? Is AI the servant or is AI the master? Or can we partner with AI? Or is it a whole new thing that we have to learn as a discrete discipline on its own? And we've come up with a little bit of a different perspective on what change leadership actually looks like now in the age of AI. And Jen has got a nice little way to explain that.
Thanks, Lena. I don't know about anybody on this call. Um, if you have ever been involved, if you come from fishing families or you've been spent much time fishing on the open seas. So I came from a family where all of my uncles and grandfather were deep sea fishermen and have been out, unfortunately, a few times on those trips. I got to say, not loving them. However, um, one of the things that you learn if you have the unfortunate situation to be in really rough seas is that it's not having a fancy boat that matters, right? It's having a really good anchor. And make no mistake, an anchor is not going to hold you in the one space, but what it does do is it stops you drifting and gives you some level of control. And so I was thinking about that as a metaphor to say, I actually think this is what the relationship is between agility and AI. So AI is our rough seas at the moment, right? You cannot open LinkedIn, you cannot open an email, a Substack, anything on our digital screens without seeing some level of high volume noise about AI. It is usually fear-based, it is usually anxiety-based. There is a lot of advice coming out to change practitioners and leaders around how they should be adopting AI, how they should be using it, how they should be navigating it. And it can be extremely, extremely overwhelming. I would argue I've been in the workforce for 30 years, 30 plus years. I would say it's probably the most disruptive thing that I have seen in our industry. I do think that there are strong parallels between what we're seeing at the moment around AI and the introduction of Agile and agility. I think we're in a hype cycle at the moment where we're yet to see it calm down and how people get the benefits and where people have the wisdom to say, actually, no, this isn't what we're going to use. Lena and I have always talked about in the past that the storm is the norm, right? This is part of why we got into this space of agility and agile was recognizing that whilst the concept of VUCA is some 30 plus years, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, it's VUCA on steroids at the moment. And this means that leaders really need some support in being able to navigate these stormy seas. And so for us, agility provides that anchor. And we can see in the organizations we're working with who are coming to us at the moment that if you haven't mastered agile and agility, you're going to find it a real struggle to master AI. So in your leadership shifts, right, your in how you lead change, if you are not comfortable with test and learn, with experimentation, with increased collaboration, with all of those things that are really the epicenter of agility, you're going to be very much left behind with AI, and it will be really, really problematic. So I think for us, the tsunami of AI combined with the volume of change, right? So again, we're seeing lots and lots of reports at the moment, which is telling us that the volume of change in our organizations is unprecedented and unsustainable. And so these two things together, this is why I talk about VUCA on steroids, the deep uncertainty got a lot deeper, right? It means that as leaders, you need to think differently, you need to work differently, you need to learn differently, and you need to lead differently. Now, on the think differently, so one of the things that we cover in our course, the Agile Mindset, are these 5 shifts. And again, the leaders that I've been working with at the moment on how do they lead change in an AI-enabled environment or an organization that's adopting AI, we're starting at the agile mindset, right? That because of the fear base that's happening with the employees, they really need to step into a mindset of empathy. Because there is no known orthodoxy, understanding, expertise of AI, there's no point having an expert mindset. You've got to have a beginner's mindset and be thinking and being really curious and thinking about how might we do these things. This truly is the time for done is better than perfect, right? If you are playing with AI as a change leader, looking at how you adopt it, introduce it, you want to be encouraging people to just have a go. Don't wait to be perfect. You must get really comfortable with the fact that failure, you're going to flop at this, you're going to make mistakes. But it's learning through those mistakes that will actually make you a really strong leader of change. And then finally, and perhaps it should have been at the beginning, the forefront, you need to have self-compassion. You need to give yourself grace because this is a deeply, deeply unsettling and difficult time. Lena.
Thank you. So, along with thinking differently, is calling now for leading differently. And this is where agile change leadership is that anchor that Jen is talking about in these times. So, the anchor of agility is an enabler rather than considering it this whole new discipline. So, this kind of releases us, I think, from a need to have to know everything about AI at once. Because if you're leading in a way with that agility, you'll be able to navigate those stormy waters with confidence as well as with capability. So one way to look at agile leadership and how it hangs, I think, with um, the AI overlay is to look at the Agile Manifesto, which we will all be familiar with. So, the Agile Manifesto, as we know, has these 4 values. And if we pop the AI lens over these, what we can see is that the items on the right, the items in the navy blue box, are the ones where AI can really give us a lot of grunt and we can really leverage AI for things like processes and tools, documentation, contract negotiation, and following a plan. The items on the left, however, in the green box, are the ones that really rely on a human-centered approach. They rely on empathy, engagement, and things that AI cannot replace. They cannot replace that human connection that builds trust, empathy, engagement, and the agile leadership. So what I'm going to do is I'll quickly walk through each of those steps, each of those 4, and just to give you an idea of what that looks like. So for individuals and interactions, AI can tell us what to say, but it doesn't really understand the emotions that people are feeling or the dynamics within the team. And what we provide as humans is that psychological safety, the empathy, and the emotional intelligence. So with each time something is generated by AI, we need to step in and validate it. And that's where we bring our expertise to the table to validate what AI is doing for us. For the second one, working software, AI can certainly help us write documentation, great documentation, detailed documentation at the speed of sound, but it cannot determine whether that team is solving the right problem or whether it's in the right context or it's creating something that customers really value. Again, so what does the human want? What's the user-centric approach to this? So AI will give us a generic, great starting point, great things to bounce around in our brains and to think about, but it won't do that validation again. For customer collaboration, yes, AI can write fantastic contracts, it can compare contracts, it can review contracts, but it can't build that partnership that you have through conversations and engagement and connection and responding to change and versus following a plan. AI can bring to us patterns and themes and help us join dots perhaps where we haven't joined dots before. But what matters more is where can the trade-offs be made? How do we prioritize? Where's that sense making and judgment that we need to bring to the table as an agile leader or an agile practitioner to really make sense of that, to make sure that it's going to make sense back with our people? So this is a really good frame to think about the wisdom of knowing what to let AI do for us, and then when we need to step in and step up and be the leader and do all that sense making.
Thank you, Lena. Now, sense making is a great lead in, right? Because what this really means for you as leaders of change is a relatively new discipline, one around situational wisdom. And I say that with the caveat that we've always needed some level of situational wisdom, but I think this is the time when it's truly being tested for us. And I like to think about it as, what we have in front of us, our tools, our knowledge, our skills, our practices as leaders of change are pieces of a puzzle. But it's a puzzle that never actually forms the same outlook each time you put it together, right? Which so it's a little bit different, perhaps, a three-dimensional puzzle that we're working with. So for Lena and I, these are the pieces of the puzzle that we see that change leaders who are really successful are playing with at the moment. And they represent 6 shifts, 18 pieces, one puzzle. What we're going to do is we're going to take you a bit of a speed date through some of these to give you a sense of what they are. But the shifts are really around what we call the 3 C's, so communication, collaboration, and community. They're about leadership, and that is really about having differentiated leadership approaches, but also what are you doing from a change sponsorship perspective? How are you using agile governance? And let me just mute somebody. Good. And then there's also, and this is, I think sometimes this is the most difficult shift for leaders to make, is looking at their personal qualities. It's where the transformation goes within. Look, how do you dial up the empathy, the vulnerability, the curiosity? Of course, Agile, the practices that are really going to support you leading through what's happening at the moment. The 3 R's, we have a little bit of a different take on readiness, resilience, and resistance. And then the importance of human-centered change leadership. As Lena said before, building the psychological safety, personas, and journeying. So let's have a look at the first one, the 3 C's. Now, interestingly, at the end of this webinar, so, stick around, we're going to give you a quiz to just test which of these areas are the strongest and which are the areas that you might want to work on. Spoiler alert, with the thousands of people who have done this quiz over the last couple of years, this is actually the area that is the lowest for people. And I always find that a little bit surprising. But leaders seem to be struggling with communication, collaboration, and community. So let me unpack that for you. So the big shifts in change leader communication, really, where we were once was change communication from your leaders was a top-down cascade. And we focused on, who, what, who was sending the message, what the message was, what channel we were using, what effect we had in the audience. And all of your change communications were seen as deliverables, right? They were outputs that had to be signed off. Now, what's proving most effective is a focus on dialogue and sense making. So when things are continuously changing around you, you need to be able to keep communication open and help people make sense of things. Now, I do say help people make sense of things. You can't make sense of this change for any of your people, right? Sense making is in the brain of the beholder, but you can assist in providing cues and space, right? So this comes through conversations, not announcements. This comes with a focus on the objectives. What are we trying to achieve with our change communication? And it comes with looking at communication as a practice. The second big shift that we're seeing is this movement from hierarchical change into community-driven change and networks. And again, if we think about what's happening at the moment, this fire horse of change, the AI dominance, the high volume changes coming in all around the place, the likelihood that your neat and tidy organizational chart and structure is actually going to be an appropriate way to facilitate change, to roll change out, is very, very low, right? There is so much uncertainty and ambiguity around. You're going to need community, because community is where people can help you. Community is where people can identify, hey, this person over here, they know more about this. You should have a conversation with them. So this community and network-driven change has now proven to be far more effective and efficient, right? So there is efficiency in using your community, whereas it actually slows you down to move through the organization in a hierarchical, structured way. That power that exists, that formal power, becomes a handbrake on your change. The third concept in the 3 Cs is collaboration. And one of the most wonderful practices. And when I talk about, what has changed my career as a change practitioner, it has been the practice of working out loud. Simon Terry, one of the experts in the field in this space, introduced this model back in 2014. So we are, 12 years ago, with the concept of working out loud and the power of working out loud. Working out loud as a leader means that you are being vulnerable enough to show what you are doing as you are doing it, with the intent that other people will help you improve what you are doing. So it really moves away from this expert mindset to saying, hey, here's our quarterly goals. Here's what I think we're going to do to achieve it. Here's where we're up to on this, and creating space for people to help you as a leader. And so Simon's model really suggests that there are levels that you work through, and you start with sharing out loud, and that helps you connect, who in the organization knows things, what is it that we're sharing. But as you progress into this space of working out loud and demonstrably, visibly showing what you're doing as a leader, you're moving into this space of problem solving, right? You're looking at how you do things, and that unlocks innovation. Well, once people know who, what, how, why don't we do something different? And so you're really moving up the value chain of agility, of collaboration, of empowerment, trust, and value. So it's an absolute game changer in how we work as leaders of change. So those 3 concepts, what you just saw is what we teach in module 1, right? And as I said before, it's where leaders self-rate the lowest. And each of these 3 shifts become a full module in our Agile Change Leadership Certificate. And when you do that course, what you find is that we teach it in short videos, so it's all micro learning lessons, but then we give you experiments. And so your assessment is you have to run experiments. So you run an experiment on community, you run an experiment on collaboration, you run an experiment on change communication, and you submit those reflections and what you did to Lena and I, and we assess it and we give you feedback as peer coaches on that. So it's quite an intensive process, but it makes sure that the learning really sticks. Lena, talk to us
Yes.
about leadership.
Sure. I always find it interesting, Jen, that the first module is the three C's when we didn't know that that was going to be the one that leaders would find the most challenging after we started running the questionnaire. So that's quite fascinating. Leadership. So when Jen spoke about differentiated leadership earlier on, what we're looking at there is three leadership approaches that I'll dive into in a moment, and that's adaptive leadership, distributed leadership, and one that you're probably familiar with because in Agile there was a lot of talk around servant leadership, around, with Scrum Masters and things like that, that was very much thrown around. We also look at change sponsorship and Agile governance with there's some good checklists around about how to do that well. And we contrast agile governance. It's important to contrast agile governance with traditional governance and what that looks like in a more agile world. So let's have a look at, excuse me, those differentiated leadership styles, of which there are three. And where I created this infographic as part of the course, which is a summary on a page of what they look like. So adaptive leadership, very quickly, I'll just give you a little bit of an explainer around that. When we look at adaptive leadership, we contrast adaptive challenges with technical challenges because technical challenges are challenges that are easy to solve. It's usually a known solution and they can be often solved by the expert in that field. But adaptive leadership is a little more complex. It requires maybe culture changes, shifts in mindset and behaviors, and it's not so clear cut. So, with adaptive leadership, you call on the wisdom of the crowd to help you get through that rather than just relying on one or two people with an expert mindset. So, adaptive leadership is a big mindset shift for a lot of leaders, as all of these are. So, what we can see is we've got servant leadership, which is a desire to put service over that desire for status. Adaptive leadership we've summarised as responsive over reactive, and distributed leadership is a shared practice which is more common in not for profits and community based organisations, but really has a lot of merit in organisations as a leadership style, as more people can become informal leaders. So, this is more about informal leadership over formal leadership. What's really interesting about all of these three leadership approaches is it means letting go of old practices, a shift in mindset, and as Jen's about to discuss very, very shortly in personal qualities, it means you have to demonstrate vulnerability as a leader and a lot of empathy as well. I think that does that segue into your qualities right now, Jen? I think it does.
Perfectly,
Oh, wow.
perfectly. So this is really about, I like to talk about the transformation moves within, right? This is the internal work of change leadership. And as Lena has signified, these underpin so many of the shifts that you need to make in your external practice, right? It is very difficult to work out loud if you are not comfortable with vulnerability. In our course, what we look at is empathy, vulnerability, and curiosity. Um, so, in a nutshell, what we're talking about from an empathy perspective, once upon a time, change leadership was about head and logic, right? So, the leader that made the most sense was the one that was going to be your change leader. Now, because of this high volume change and unsustainability, we need heart-centered, but most importantly, a focus on the experience design of change. You can only do that with empathy. Once, the leader who showed vulnerability was seen as a weakness, right? And leaders were very uncomfortable moving into a space of vulnerability because they perceived they would be seen as weak. Now, thankfully, we've started to recognize that there is, it's really much more of a strength. And the beauty of vulnerability is it creates relatability. Once you've got relatability, you've got followership. So that's why that's so important. And then finally, curiosity. So once upon a time, you got hired, promoted in the organization, referred because of your expertise. Now, what we need is that beginner's mindset. Lena,
Yes, good old Agile as a discrete module in itself, with particular focus on failing fast and gathering feedback. Jen mentioned experimentation and how important that was. Minimum viable product and done is better than perfect is what we cover there. So let's look at what some of those shifts look like, and I'll talk to those. The first one is failing fast, and we talk about shifting from people who avoid failure or failure avoidance. This also comes up in our agile mindset to progress from learning through failure. And this is a big shift because all through our schooling, we've been graded as a pass or a fail. And the fail was never the one you wanted, never the report card you wanted to take home to your parents. So it was very, very binary, and that mindset has stuck with us, and it's something that can be difficult to break through. So we say they focus on the lesson learned and reward the lessons and iteration that come from failure. We've got some great stories that we share when we've got more time or in the course about that. So one of the ways is through regular retrospectives and finding out what didn't go well. And if people really don't like that F word, I always say use different words like, well, what could we have done better? Which is, what can we do differently next time? Or what didn't work? So you can avoid the word altogether if it triggers people. Minimum viable product, long requirements gathering and validating now to that fast feedback cycle and quicker to market. And the really lovely story about minimum viable product is Zappos, the shoe store online, which is now an online billion-dollar company. When they started out without any stock. They started out with photographs of shoes from other stores, and when they realized they had demand, they would go and buy those shoes and then ship them out. So they basically started out with zero stock, nothing, no hardware. And then they took it from there and learnt as they went and what was going to sell well. So that's a beautiful story in a speed date about minimum viable product. And what about done is better than perfect? How many of you are recovering perfectionists? I know I probably am. So this is a really challenging shift that relies on vulnerability, as Jen spoke about. So a lot of these themes really tie together and overlap of what makes this agile leader truly shifted. So perfection can slow us down and get in the way of progress. It can actually be paralysis by analysis. So it's good to keep in mind that perfection is subjective. So what you think might not be perfect or not good enough to go and take to someone to talk about is is not maybe the right definition for somebody else. It could be quite okay. So we say here delivery is prioritized, and a really good approach here is to define what done looks like. So done rather than perfect is a very good frame here to help us shift away from that attachment to perfection. Jen, I think
thank
it's, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So our fifth shift, try saying that three times and not getting yourself in trouble, is what we call the three R's, and that is about readiness, resilience, and resistance. So we think we've come a little bit of a way on this, but there's a few leaders who haven't heard this information. So one of the biggest shifts has been how we approach resilience. Once upon a time, and actually it's not once upon a time, it's still happening a lot in organizations at the moment, is that leaders are saying if people were just more resilient, we'd be able to introduce more change, right? And so we have resilience workshops, we have yoga mats, we have the calm room, all of those kind of things, well-being practices, which are really about this medicinal approach to resilience in people. We think it's a lot more healthy to think about resilience as building change muscles, right? So you can look at resilience from the perspective of regeneration, and how do you build the capacity and capability for change rather than how to brace for change. Resistance. Resistance for the longest time has been, excuse me, blame the employees, right? We're seeing resistance to change all over the place. It's getting in the way of our change. Enlightened leaders, the shift they've made is to recognizing that resistance is a natural and valid response to change. It is fleeting, it is part of the process, but most importantly, it is feedback to you. As a leader, when you see resistance happening around you, you want to stop, you want to pause, and just be a little bit curious about that to find out why. And then finally, readiness for the longest time has sat in the domain of project checklists, right? Are we ready to introduce this change? We argue for creating readiness as a really empowering activity. Now, let me tell you what that's about. Readiness is something that you can co-create with your teams as a leader. So when I do change readiness activities in organizations, I'm working with teams and leadership groups to say, tell me what you need to feel you are ready with this change. And when you get the team create and nominate what are the elements that they need to feel ready for the change, you have given them autonomy and control over the change that's coming through. Now, some of the times they're going to tell you things that are completely inappropriate, right? There's no chance that you're going to be able to do that. It allows you to get on the front foot of that conversation and manage expectations way in advance of go live, which is when it becomes really problematic. When you've got teams shouting at you, but you didn't give us this, right? You've prepared them that it wasn't coming. There's also going to be things that they tell you which are a no-brainer. Of course, you're going to give them that, but you've got that sense of reassurance that yes, we will be doing it. So a really empowering way of doing change readiness. Lena, tell us about the sixth shift. There we go. Fifth and sixth. We're going to have to rethink this one, I think.
Maybe we needed another coffee before we started. I know it is a tangler, isn't it? In the sixth shift, we look at psychological safety, personas, and employee journey maps. So let's start with psychological safety, which I'll just do a quick recap of psychological safety, and that is the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, or concerns. And a lot of work's been done in that space by Amy Edmondson. So that definition was inspired by her. So I've got a little story to tell you about psychological safety because quite often we don't feel psychologically safe when there's power distance. And when I say power distance, I mean really senior people and then less senior people in the same room working together. This happens in a cockpit where they call it the cockpit gradient, and it also happens in an operating theatre. But you're probably wondering how do these two meet? And I'm going to talk to you about that. So when an aircraft is below 10,000 feet, whether it's going up or coming down, there's a thing called the sterile cockpit where the crew in the cockpit don't chit chat about anything except their safety checklists. So, excuse me. Okay, so when an aircraft is below 10,000 feet, unnecessary chit chat and non essential duties have been shut down. Because there was this cockpit gradient or power distance in an operating room, a couple of nurses cleverly tapped into this below 2,000 feet concept because they were feeling not psychologically safe at work. If they needed to speak out and say something in the operating room, they felt quite intimidated by the surgeons. There was obviously that power distance. So they wanted to embrace an initiative in their hospital, and this is taken off around the world, which is really interesting, where they could say or do something to let the surgeons and all the operating staff know that unnecessary chit chat while you were prepping a patient who still hadn't gone under anaesthetic could be quite stressful for them because the focus really wasn't on them. It gave the impression that the people were busy talking about what they did on the weekend, the football match they went to see, and they wanted to bring a common language to convey a message where they could say, could you just shut up without getting into trouble for being insubordinate? So what they did is they brought in the code word now in operating theatres is below 10,000 or below 10,000 feet. So if you're in an operating theatre, you're a nurse or anyone, any seniority in the operating theatre, and it's drifting to too much chit chat from focusing on the task at hand, which also has a number of checklists for pre-operation. It is okay now to say below 2,000, regardless of your status or your hierarchy. And that's improved. This is all about improving patient care and safety. So that's a really nice story about how lack of psychological safety was navigated in an environment where there was a lot of power distance. So I love that story. I've told it many times. Personas. Another way to bring to the table human-centered change. So personas really reminds us that these people are specific, not segments. And this is where I reflect on the items on the left in the four agile values and the items on the right, because the AI agent will not really know what those people that we work with, what their pain points are, what their motivations are, what their preferences are, perhaps for communication. This is information we probably need to feed into AI as a prompt so then they can help us with key messages. But we need to find this out first because we talk to the people and find out and create the persona with them in the room. So, what energizes them? What blows their hair back? What gets them up at night? And what's their user story? What do they need so they can actually do their job from here? So this is just a little template approach, if you like, about the sort of things you would have in a persona creation discussion. And this is a visual representation of what a persona could look like. So I always say, give your persona a name. They're not a stereotype. They're a composite character. Okay, so a lot of people think, oh, they're just stereotypes of a particular occupation. They're not if you talk to the people in your organization. Someone in your organization who works on a help desk is not going to be the same persona as someone who works on a help desk in a completely different organization. So this is the human-centered approach we bring here, is to listen to their pain points. Let's have a look at journey maps. Once upon a time, especially when I first started in change, we used to assess the current state and map the future state using process maps with lots of swim lanes. But what the process maps did was capture a process. If we go to the next slide and look at a journey map, and these are tools inspired by design thinking and human-centered design, we can see what the process map was missing is what people were thinking and feeling and what their pain points were. So once we identify what they're thinking and feeling, that's where you get the real opportunities crop up and you're getting their perspective, not the project plan's perspective, because quite often process maps were done, the future state process maps were done without any consultation. This is just what the process is going to look like and this is what you're going to be doing. But this is doing it with this approach helps people visualize the future state or really tell you what's going on in the current state, because I do employee journeying for current and future state, really, really valuable. The most important thing about employee journeying that I'll always hit home is it gives people a safe forum, a psychologically safe forum to talk about what they're thinking and how they're feeling, which may not, a forum that may not arise at another conversation or another time in your change work. So a lot of value there in the employee journey mapping.
Fabulous. Thank you, Lena. So, what we've done so far is we've gone through the 6 shifts and we've gone at a relatively fast clip. We've gone relatively high level across them. What we wanted to offer you was for those of you who are thinking that you want to go deep on all 18 and do our Agile Change Leadership Certificate, we're going to offer you a 25% discount code that you can use. And I think Lena was going to put that in the chat. What you'll find is this course is on demand, which means you can do it anytime. It is, as I said before, micro learning. You get practical case studies and templates that you can use straight away. We offer from time to time live cohort sessions where we offer you the opportunity to catch up with us and you get an industry recognized certificate or digital badge on completion. Now, if you find, and we'll send this link out to you after the webinar, which you'll be able to use, and it'll be live till June the 30th. So let's recap. These are all 18 pieces. The communication, collaboration, community, leadership, differentiated leadership, a focus on change sponsorship, agile governance, qualities, the work within on empathy, vulnerability, curiosity, agile, fail fast, MVP, done is better than perfect, 3Rs, readiness, resilience, resistance, human-centered, psychological safety, personas, and journeying. Take a moment. I want you to think about which of these is the shift that you probably need to make the biggest movement in. Which is the one that if you put a focus on today, this week, you would see the biggest difference in your leading of change. I said before I'd share some of the research that we've done. Interestingly, leaders rate themselves pretty high on these phases, and yet that seems to sit at contradiction with what we see in employee engagement scores, right? That said, we do find that the three C's is the one where leaders are self-rating themselves the lowest. So I guess the call out for me on this is as a change practitioner, this could be if you're a change practitioner supporting a leader, this could be the one that you want to go back to your leaders today and have a chat with them about these three shifts that we've spoken about and see how they introduce them. If you are a leader leading people through change, this might be the area that you want to put your attention to. So I'm curious, we've got time if I've looked at that correctly. Yes, we have. Pop in the chat. Which is the area that you want to do most of? Super curious. 3 R's. Yep. Communication, human-centered, human-centered. The human-centered is really interesting so yeah, I can see people getting excited about human-centered. So just to flag there, we also do have Design Thinking Meets Change Management as a micro course with the Agile Change Leadership Institute, which will give you more on that human-centered if you're wanting just a smaller piece of it. When you do the human-centered work in real life, it often feels like you're slowing things down, right? To actually do these practices. But it's that intentionality of finding out more about people that is so important that actually speeds up the benefits of your change. So,
Jen,
absolutely.
I might
Agile.
share a hot tip on human-centered too. In my experience, if you say to some people who are quite new to the concept of design thinking and human-centered change, maybe in an organization that's less change mature, that you want to run a persona workshop or an employee journeying workshop, they're likely just to do an eye roll or not even know what you're talking about. So sometimes I just don't even use those words. I'll say, let's run a workshop and find out what people are doing now to help us validate the current state and how they're feeling about it. So sometimes I just navigate the conversations in a more generic way rather than just say, oh, I'm doing an employee journey workshop.
Yeah. And Dana, you get that a lot, the eye roll. Yes. Excellent.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
Now, did you want
Oh,
the Score app link dropped, Jen?
yeah, would you mind
Here
putting
it
that in
is.
the chat? So if you want to
There
do
it
the
is.
same
Yeah.
quiz that we've looked at before, Lena's going to put in the chat. That's the diagnostic that we use that gives us that information. So, but again, we'll shoot that out by email to you afterwards. We have a couple of minutes left for questions. Did anybody have any specific questions that they wanted to ask us? Let me check, see if there's anything coming through in the chat. We've all gone quiet. Juhi, would you like to come off mute and talk to us?
Thanks so much, Lena and Jen. This was really, really very informative. And I know you mentioned that we don't need to boil the ocean and we need to focus on one of the shifts rather. Um, but I'm just wondering, like you've put these six shifts and 18, you know, subcomponents. What is ideal state? Because every organization is going through this tremendous amount or volume of change. Leaders are getting frantically, panicked about what do they need to do. And of course, the
Mm,
employees are not satisfied. The
mm,
employee engagement scores are quite, not very positive. So what do we do here? I mean, these
yeah.
6 years, do we do everything? Do we phase it out? All the all
I
all of it looks important to me.
All of it is important, but you can only do what you can only do. And for
Exactly.
us, this is about cognitive overwhelm, but it's also about, and part of the reason why in the course we give experiments, because it's in doing the experiment that you get immediate feedback. That immediate feedback gives you a dopamine rush, right? And the dopamine rush is what starts to calm you down and go, okay, we're on the right path. So, how do you eat the elephant? With a knife and fork, bite-sized pieces. This is the same concept. And Junie, I love your question. Sorry, Juhi, I love your question because it's the intent behind it that it really is about how do you improve, right? And people notice when you are trying these experiments, when you are trying new ways of leading, the people around you notice. They're not asking you to make a 10% improvement in your change leadership. They're seeing those little shifts happening all around the place. So for us,
Mhm.
it's pick just one of those 18. If you did one every week for 18 weeks, then in 6 months' time, your people are going to notice a quantum leap in your leadership. So it's more about getting really intentional with each shift rather than overwhelmed with the whole package. But the struggle is real.
Yes.
Karen, you've
Thank
got your
you.
hand up. Would you like to come off mute?
Yes, I am off mute. And when you were talking about community-driven change, they've got certain structures and typical change, but how is that different? The community-driven change? Is it more a community practice? What is different?
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. So we teach Luke Gallopin's work on social architecture. And what Luke teaches with his concept is that our organizations are structured around energy in particular communities. And so part of the work we want to do is look for where is there energy about this change in a community that may not be a community of practice. It could be, and certainly in agile organizations where you've got guilds and you've got chapters, that can be easier to identify. But some of my best work on culture has happened with the group that post about their pets on the Enterprise Social Network, right? That is a community that is really energized about fun and joy and laughter. And if you can tap into that community and their energy, you find that they're actually really good agents of change because that's what brings them alive in the workplace, right?
Mhm.
So it's not so much looking at the white space. You know, Luke talks about looking at the white space in the organizational chart. So it's not the lines and the boxes, it's what's going on in between. Where are there? Uh, I remember I had one of my change team do his best work at the maternity leave breakfast for the EAs. He had connected really strongly with the EAs in the organization. And so he was getting invitations to all of their social events. And whenever he would meet them there at these breakfasts and stuff like, they'd be pumping him for information. Tell us about this. What's happening with this? You know, what can we do? How can we support you? And so he'd really connected with that community really strongly, and it became an amplifier of our change. So it's just about being attuned to where is there energy in the organization and how can you tap into it.
Yeah, I like that, Jen. I've got this saying, energy flows where the energy goes. So, but there was a question also in the chat from Julia about future state journey mapping. Julia, do you want to come off mute? Um,
Yeah, I'm just kind of
let's,
curious. Like, I'm actually going to be
yeah,
doing a big transformation project.
yeah, yeah,
Um, I've always done, I suppose you need a baseline and understand the processes. And we've got I suppose, an interesting scenario where we provide services, they all get different funding, which means they all get different um, reporter requirements. So
yeah.
we'll need to do our medium level current state, but do we still need to do a future state, or do we just do the journey mapping?
When you say future state, are you
That's a
thinking like
process map.
yeah, as a process map? Look, there's value in the process map because the processes get captured, and you could probably tap into AI to help with a lot of that. The value in doing a journey map, the value in doing a current state journey map is sometimes you uncover workarounds that people are doing that aren't even in the current state process maps
Oh,
because
good.
of what,
Yeah.
so you might uncover things that are happening and you go, oh yeah, we don't really do that anymore. We've worked out a better way to do it, or we skipped 3 steps and we're a lot people. The wisdom of the crowd is what you really need to find out for the future state, Julia. The really helpful bit I find in a future state journey map is you manage expectations up front. So if all of a sudden this wish list evolves about what they really feel or think or want, this is where you can say, look, that's not in scope for this change, but we'll take your concerns on board, or you can really tap into what some of their pain points are, or what they're going to miss. Or there might be some things, in fact, that you'll uncover that can be easily included in the change that we hadn't even thought about, because we're not often the ones close to that process. We're just facilitating the process. So there is value if you have time for sure to do it.
Very good. Thank you. That does
Yeah.
help.
And Jen, there
Okay,
was a
speaking of time, we're at
yes,
time, folks.
yeah.
So
There was a good question, Jen, on resistance. Maybe we could pick that up or see if we've covered that in a blog
we
about
might we
resistance.
might look for that and
Yes,
pop it
yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah,
response. And I can see a
yeah.
couple more questions coming through, Kitty. So we're going to pick up the questions, and in our email that we send out, we'll cover them off there. But thanks everybody for joining us. We hope we see some of you come through on our certificate program. Have a fabulous day and keep an eye on our webinars as they come through. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.